All right, let's get right into it. We are talking about one of the most incredible, most world-changing events in all of human history. This is the story of the Spanish Conquest, the moment the Old World and the New World crashed into each other, and how two of the greatest empires in the Americas just fell. And that brings us to the one question that hangs over everything, a question historians have wrestled with for centuries. How on earth did a few hundred Spanish conquistadors, literally thousands of miles from home, bring down the Aztec and Inca empires, civilizations with millions of people? I mean, it just sounds impossible, right? And when you look at the numbers, the mismatch is it's staggering. Against the Aztecs, you've got about 600 Spaniards, and against the Incas, even less, maybe 180 guys. They're up against these huge, advanced civilizations with massive armies. On paper, this isn't even a fight. It should have been over before it started. So to figure out how these giants could be toppled, we have to know who they were first. Let's get a quick snapshot of these two incredible worlds right at the moment just before the Spanish arrive on their shores. First up, in what's now Mexico, we have the Aztec Empire. This was an amazingly sophisticated and powerful society, and their capital city, Tenochtitlan, was an absolute marvel, a massive city that seemed to float on a lake. And ruling over it all was the Emperor Moctezuma II. Then, if you go way down south, all along the Andes Mountains, you find the Inca Empire, an unbelievable kingdom built in the mountains with incredible roads and a super organized government. But, and this is so important, right when the Spanish show up, the Inca are just finishing up a nasty civil war. Two brothers, Atahualpa and Huáscar, had been fighting for the throne, and the empire was literally tearing itself apart. It was already wounded. Okay, now let's talk about the timeline, because the speed of what happened next is just jaw-dropping. We're talking about a little more than a decade, and the entire map of the Americas is changed forever. So check this out. It all kicks off in 1519. Hernán Cortés and his crew land in Mexico. Just 2 years later, 2 years, that incredible city, Tenochtitlan, is a smoldering ruin. Then, about 10 years later, Francisco Pizarro, hearing about Cortés's success, decides to try his luck. In 1532, he pulls off this insane ambush and captures the Inca emperor, Atahualpa. And by the very next year, the Inca capital, Cuzco, is gone too. It was a stunningly fast collapse. So we've got the who, the what, and the when. But that just brings us back to the biggest question of all: how? What was in the conqueror's toolkit? What were their secrets that let them pull this off against such impossible odds? Well, the thing is, it wasn't just one magic bullet. It was more like a perfect storm. Historians have boiled it down to this deadly combination of 5 key things that all just happened to work in the Spanishers' favor. So let's break them down one by one. Okay, first, the obvious one, their gear. The Spanish had steel swords, steel armor, and of course, guns. But you know what was maybe even more important? Horses. Just think about it. The people of the Americas had never seen a horse before. So to them, a man in armor charging on this giant beast, it didn't look human. It looked like some kind of terrifying monster god. It was a psychological weapon just as much as a physical one. Next up, and this might be the most critical piece of the whole puzzle, the Spanish were masters of exploiting divisions. They were brilliant at it. See, the Aztec Empire had conquered and subjugated lots of other groups, and those groups hated them. So Cortés finds one of these groups, the Tlaxcalans, and makes an alliance. Suddenly, he's got thousands of local warriors on his side. Same story with the Inca. Pizarro walks right into the mess left by that civil war and sides with the factions that were against the new emperor, Atahualpa. In fact, this one quote from a Tlaxcalan historian says it all. It basically reframes the entire event. He wrote that the conquest of Mexico was really a war of Indians against Indians. The Spanish were the spark, for sure, but the massive armies that actually took down the Aztec capital, they weren't Spanish. They were other native people who wanted to be free of Aztec rule. But, maybe the single most destructive weapon the Spanish brought with them, they didn't even know they were carrying it. It was invisible. We're talking about diseases like smallpox, measles, the flu. These were common back in Europe, but they had never existed in the Americas. The native people had zero immunity. And the craziest part? These diseases traveled faster than the conquistadors. Whole villages were wiped out before a single Spaniard ever set foot there, creating absolute chaos. And the death toll, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. In some areas, the population dropped by up to 90%. 90. This wasn't a war anymore, it was a demographic collapse, one of the worst in all of human history. You could argue this one factor was more powerful than any army. So, once these two giant empires were gone, the world was never the same again. It was fundamentally remade. So let's take a look at the long-term aftermath, because the shockwaves from these events are still being felt today. The fall of the empires wasn't the end. It was the beginning of 300 years of Spanish colonial rule. For 3 centuries, Spain would control a gigantic empire stretching all the way from California down to the southern tip of South America. And the legacy of all this is just immense. All the gold and silver flowing from the Americas made Spain the richest, most powerful empire on the planet. For the indigenous people, their civilizations were shattered. Their culture was forever changed as Catholicism and the Spanish language spread everywhere. And really, for the whole world, this was the brutal, violent birth of the globalized world we live in today. Which brings us right back to our big question, but now it's a little more complicated, isn't it? It's pretty clear there's no easy single answer. But it leaves us with something really fascinating to think about. If you had to pick one, what was the real tipping point? Was it the invisible enemy, the germs? Was it the technological advantage of steel and guns? Or was it the brilliant, ruthless strategy of the conquistadors? That's the real debate.